Well, the problem, as has already been alluded to, of appearing at this time of the afternoon is, first of all, I probably might be interrupting somebody's desire to go to sleep. And as Peter's already mentioned, is by this time just about everything you were going to say has already been talked about by somebody, in some cases by many of you. So there's probably going to be a little bit of dynamic editing of some of the slides, because there's no need for us to dwell on these too long. The other thing I was going to say is I have been in better health, so if I croak and die halfway through this presentation, please excuse me, but my throat is not in the best condition, so if you can't hear me, let me know. So, this is a kind of recap, so as I say, I won't dwell on this too long. Is what's changed since the introduction of digital television, digital broadcast? Well, obviously, the improvement in receivers sometimes it's not an improvement, as we heard from Tim. You know, sometimes the speakers in your plasma screen or your LED is not quite what you wanted, but shall we say that they're capable of delivering better dynamic range than the 3-inch speaker you used to have in your old set. Very typically, as we've heard, there's more speakers at home, so the familiarity with the movie experience, I guess, is something which again, consumer expectations have changed. I think it's true to say that because of that, there is a general tendency for people to crank the volume up louder, which case they tend to get caught out even more extremely when something does appear that they weren't expecting, leading to complaints. I think, you know, standards of mixing and these kind of things have improved, so there's more cinema-style mixing appearing as a regular television broadcast program. But that, of course, then leads to a bigger contrast with some of the, shall we say, non-dramatic type of programming. Oops, I think we've gone through too. So what's remained the same? Well, I mean, even though my local free cycle group has got hundreds of old analog televisions being thrown out now due to the digital switchover, there are still quite a lot of those old 3-inch box type speakers out there, so we have to provide for a different kind of listening experience. I think a very important point, which has kind of been touched on a little bit, but I think it's worth remembering, and it certainly is a very relevant context in terms of file-based, is that the 24/7 broadcasting with so many channels available these days means that de facto you're going to be getting an awful lot of reruns of some very old material, and those of you watching Dad's Army for the 133rd time will be more than well aware of the fact that at the time those programs were created mixed, of course we weren't talking about even stereo, and they were being mixed for the 3-inch box in somebody's living room. So there's a huge difference in the dynamics and the quality of that kind of program material from somebody that's doing the latest drama on the BBC or any other program, which is typically being mixed in surround using all the latest technology that's available today. De facto, there's going to be a huge discrepancy in the perceived loudness and effects that you're hearing. And it goes without saying, we've touched on this loads of times, is that the whole point of a commercial is to grab your attention. So obviously they've been trying to find ways of making it as loud as possible for as long as we've been having commercials, and that was certainly something that was an issue in cinemas before it was in terms of the broadcast side. So, you know, these factors are well known to us. So what does it all mean as far as loudness is concerned? Well, I think also because of there being a lot more interchange between different broadcasters these days, you find a lot of archive is moving around. And a lot of this stuff is therefore not of known quality, as Peter was mentioning. People don't really know its origination, or they don't know what standards it does or doesn't conform to. The choice of how you listen to it is obviously going to have results in the home, as we know. Down mixing, again, something that is very important in the sense that if it's down mixed from 5.1, it will have some changes in the way that compares with a program that was originally mixed to stereo. Overall loudness between stations, as we've already heard as well, can be different, or even between different channels from the same broadcast output. So all of these things come into play. So the difference in the quality and the output of the consumer equipment to a large extent takes any predictability away from the content provider. Somebody who's actually transmitting this stuff has no real control over how you get it in the home, because it's going to make a lot of difference what you actually listen to it on. So I think it was probably inevitable that regulation would come upon the industry, because you can't really handle a complaint if there's nothing to refer to. And if you're going to try and enforce some regulations, you need to have some logging, so there has to be some data available to support these things. And content providers are really at the mercy of the people like ourselves who are providing a multiplicity of solutions to measure and monitor what kind of loudness they're going to do. So they've got a choice to make, is how they're going to implement loudness control in their facility. Is this something they want to do on a real-time basis, or is it something that is better adapted to a file-based environment? So we've got the two flavors. We need to perhaps look at the file-based alternative. Just to quickly go through the real-time ones. Obviously, straightforwardly, this is going to be program coming in, loudness checking, some control if necessary, and going out. So I won't dwell on this slide. Very simple signal flow, nothing complicated to that. If we skip through to offline, typically this is going to be in a post-production or a quality control and archive environment. The tasks that are going to be typically done by this kind of device is to look at the loudness and true peak measurement, and we do this by method of a plug-in. It's going to generate a report, which in our case is an XML file. It's going to apply loudness correction if necessary, which is another plug-in, and in this case it's a Younger Audio plug-in, hence the joint program that we're having today. If Dolby has to be decoded and then re-encoded, again we can do this by virtue of a plug-in. Metadata will obviously have to be corrected and re-wrapped, and finally, it has to be presented as a broadcastable file at the end of the day. There may also be some rendering that has to be done to actually do some conversion from one file format to another. Right, so if we look at a little bit of a workflow diagram here, I think, again, this is no rocket science, is that you will typically be coming from a workstation device of some sort, or some kind of ingest MAM system or archive server, but we're talking about multiple file storage in this case. We can then push the required files into a watch folder and then start processing that in whatever way you want. And typically, as we said, we can process the Dolby E, we can measure and correct and report the loudness, we can update and correct metadata, encode Dolby E again, and wrap the audio and send it back out. So finally, delivering this to an output folder, and then notifications and reporting can be produced. So if we just take this into a flow chart, you can see on the left-hand side your MXF file typically would come in here, and if it's a linear PCM audio, it kind of goes straight ahead. If it's Dolby, it comes off here, gets decoded and goes back down here. The final check bit is the merging metering and monitoring device, which produces the XML file here. If it requires processing with Level Magic, for example, we would then route it out back there, and it goes through the final steps here, and it all gets re-encoded, re-wrapped, and goes out as a broadcastable file with the metadata corrected. And this is something which merging's been doing for some time. The MXF metadata sorting out. So what we've actually now done is just add all these extra things to it. But what we are able to do is to basically unbundle that to the extent that if you don't need the Dolby encode decode, you don't have to buy that plugin. If you don't want to use Level Magic, you just want to use this as a checking device, you can just use it as a checking device. So that it's up to the user choice how they manage this. So if we just look at this again into a task situation, we can define what tasks can be done. So what do we want to actually have the watch folder do? We can push the files to the watch folder from any one of the sources out there. So obviously this links in with the system so that you can recall a file from any one of these locations. You can monitor the progress from a simple web-based user interface. And we can then retrieve completed files and reports from the output folders. So it's really a very simple process, but one that's very easy to manage from a day-to-day point of view. So if we look at compliance server, loudness measurement, true peak and reporting here, so basically what we're doing here is identifying which channels we've got, whether they're required of, whether they're Dolby E, or whether they just are straightforward PCM programs. We also look at what the origination was. I mean, are these multi-channel or are they single? So we can then correlate the measurements to the channels that are there. Each program then can be measured in faster than real time. And this is an important point. I mean, one of the things about this is that it does allow you to actually speed the process up. The XML file report is generated with the results measured from each program for reference, and obviously that's something that can be then accessed by somebody checking your files to see whether or not these programs actually were compliant or not. And then, as we said, the metadata can then be updated, and you have a fully compliant MXF file going out. So if we just look what kind of thing you would look at, I mean, this is what you see in terms of the XML report. Very straightforward. Has some of those strange acronyms up the top there that we were talking about earlier on. So, you know, those you can bore your friends with at dinner parties later on. Compliance server task monitoring. This is basically, obviously, what we're trying to do. You know, what are we going to do with this process? And then that allows you to monitor this on a simple web browser. So we can then look at things like what files have been processed, what files are in the queue, what has been actually done, any files that have been skipped. We can then drill down and get more detailed information on the individual files. The web browser also then allows you to do simple things like we're halfway through a watch folder, but somebody's just come in and said, I need to check this one very urgently because we have to go out on air in half an hour. You can stop the watch file process, introduce a new file to be checked, put that one through, report it, make it compliant, send it out, and then go back to the watch folder and carry on where you left off. Obviously, it will show you the reporting of the loudness, and it will give you a list of the completed tasks. So again, it's a very simple kind of device. You can see it outside in the hall, and you can have that on your iPhone, your iPad, or any such similar device if you really want to, but typically it would probably be on a larger screen, I would suggest. So from a management perspective, what does that mean? Well, faster throughput has sometimes better flavour with the bean counting department in the sense that it's good return on investment, reduced overhead, you make a good use of your equipment. In terms of the operator, this is really in many senses an administrative function as much as anything else. So the operator himself doesn't have to be necessarily a mixing engineer, but he does have to understand the basics of how to work a computer. And hopefully have a pair of ears if he needs to check something else on there. The fact that it's computer-based obviously means that it's very easy to generate these reports, which has certain advantages in the sense that you will get a consistent report out. You will then be able to present that to whoever needs to see the report. You can keep the files in a database and recall them very easily. So some advantages in terms of this being a computer-driven operation. And in terms of training, there's nothing particularly difficult about this whole task. I mean, we're using simple web browsers. It's accessing large server banks. It's something that the broadcaster is doing every day of the week already, so there's no particular training or special knowledge required to work this system. So if we just look at a very quick summary of this, this is faster than real-time processing, and in the case of actually being able to do the level magic processing, we're in an interesting position that we can do that faster than real-time, which is, I think, potentially very helpful for making this process quick and easy. It's a neat process, as we've said. I mean, running all batch processing continuously for a single compliance server means that there's little downtime. That's something that the workflow can be very efficiently programmed and used. It's easy to use, manager-defined tasks, to watch folders. Again, there's no guesswork involved. It's something which anybody can do, I think, with minimal training. And it's repeatable. I mean, it should be relatively error-free in the sense that complex tasks can be automated and repeatable on a day-to-day basis. So that's pretty much got to the end of our presentation, and I'm aware of the fact that we are a little bit ahead of time, so there probably is some time for some questions now, and obviously we can take part in the panel. If any of you got some really technical questions, I do have one of my colleagues in the audience who is the product manager for this product, so if you want to go into any specific questions about how this works, it's probably best to direct the questions in his area. But, Florian.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.